overall news, big world news here in the Paramount Skydance merges with Warner Brothers Discovery, $110 billion sale. I said on my channel back in December that there was a good chance because of the political connections of people affiliated with Paramount Skydance. David Ellison, the son of Larry Ellison, backed by Ari Emanuel originally in their first merger to make Paramount Skydance, being that Ari was Donald Trump, the president's agent, being that the Ellisons were big donors to Donald Trump, that even though they pale in comparison to the value of Netflix, Ted Sarandos' Netflix trying to acquire the same property, that they would in all likelihood lose, and that Paramount would find a way to kind of strong arm this deal with Warner Brothers Discovery. And so it goes through for $110 billion. No surprise to anybody who's been following this. You know, I said after I think the first Zuffa show, I said there were some good fights on that show. Shout out, as always, like I like to do, to Robert Merriweather. Kane Sandoval, Julian Rodriguez had a good scrap. I think it's a good scrap this weekend, Jayo Pataya and Brandon Glanton. But what I said was, this just feels like another chip in the search for world domination more than it does. I said it felt a bit dystopian, and other commentators used the word sterile for that first show. You got Max Kellerman and Joe Tessitore really giving you the hard sell. There's no fans in there. Some good fights, but what I said was, again, this feels like just another chip in towards world domination for the people heading this venture in boxing, right? And we talk about how boxing's the microcosm of the bigger picture. Well, I got to expand here for a minute before we take it back to the micro. I got to go to the macro. I tweeted right before the United States and Israel struck Iran, okay, that upon this merger, that do people understand this is deeper than boxing now? So you got Larry Ellison, the father of David Ellison, who headed this merger. He is the biggest donor to the IDF, the Israel's Defense Force, right? You have Ari, who backed this the whole way, who is Dana White's boss. Mark Shapiro, Lawrence Epstein, and Ari Emanuel sit above Dana White, okay? And even though Ari Emanuel has had his criticisms of Bibi Netanyahu or whatever, his ties going back to his father go deep with the state of Israel, with the country of Israel. And part of this whole acquisition is not only backed by the Ellisons, who have made Larry Ellison, again, has the largest private donation to the IDF, but it's also backed by the Saudi PIF, the Saudi Public Investment Fund, and Jared Kushner has his hands in this pot as well, Trump's son-in-law, married to his daughter. So when you even consider that increasingly Trump, who's been named in the Epstein files, and again, full disclosure, I don't gangbang. I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I don't, as Raheem say, I don't put a football jersey on and stick with one team. Go ahead, show them the shirt, Raheem. It's an awesome shirt.
They're all friends, Sean, as you well know and have told me from the very beginning. They're all friends.
They're all friends, all right. Democrat.
Picking one, you can like Joey better than Ross, and you can love Chandler maybe, and have a crush on Rachel, and think Monica's a pain in the ass. But at the end of the day, they're all friends, just like these clowns. So take your jersey off and get serious.
As someone in boxing put it to me, Democrips and Republicans. Okay, so I thought that was a good way of putting it too. But you know, as there's more smoke around the fire of Epstein maybe being in bed with the Mossad, and you know, he had a big relationship with Ehud Marabak, I believe is how you say his name, the previous prime minister before Netanyahu got into office. And when you know that, you look at how Iran responded by sending missiles to Saudi Aramco, showing that Saudi and Israel have a tight-knit relationship and all this kinds of thing. And again, that potentially Trump being implicated in the Epstein files means they got him by the balls to fight the kind of wars that'll benefit them, both Saudi and Israel, that may not benefit the United States, who's getting into it. Because with everyone being hindsight 2020, Whether you were right or left, Republican, Democrat, everyone's, oh, Iraq wasn't smart. Iraq wasn't smart. Iraq wasn't smart. They both supported it heading into there, but then hindsight being 2020, $35 trillion plus of debt and deficit since for the United States, and separately, all the manufacturing being shipped to China, which isn't exactly going to help you when China and Russia are an ally of Iran, and you may need, over a long-term war, more manufacturing to win a war, but said manufacturing was shipped overseas to their allies a long time ago. Not exactly a good idea either for the United States, but what I'm getting at is that it's deeper than boxing, because this merger can prepare a propaganda machine for a war ahead of a potential war. And some people say it's not going to be a war. The United States is going to go in there, whoop that ass, blah, 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 get out of there, get the oil. And I talk with, people older than me, wiser than me, and they go, hey, Sean, you got to understand, there is a cost to being a superpower. Do you want it to be your country, or do you want it to be someone else? But that whole, like your boy Dave Chappelle said, we're trying to get that oil. Okay, that didn't benefit the American people long term. It actually weakened the United States' geopolitical stance in a lot of ways, and weakened the economy and the infrastructure of the United States. We were partying like it was 1999, like you told me once from the Prince song, right? 1999, 2000, not $40 trillion in debt, people working at grocery stores with a clerk job, cocktail waitresses like my mom. They were able to afford a house, and you can't really do that anymore. So it's not like, it'd be one argument if it's like, hey man, we got to tear shit up in the Middle East, take the resources, it sucks, it's mean, it's evil, but ultimately it'll allow us to be the top dog and allow us to be prosperous. Not really happening. So I don't think it'll happen again this time. I think it may benefit the two dominant forces in the region who have ties to now dominating boxing, to bring it back whole and center, okay? And shout out to Bob Arum. This is in no way, I wasn't saying all these connections over Bob Arum, who served for Robert F. Kennedy and John F. Kennedy and is a proud Jewish man in his own right. It's not about that. But I think our colleagues overlook all this, and I said in another post, because they're either blind to it, they're either bought, literally, or they're apathetic. They don't care. They're like Al Heyman and Eddie Hearn and Bob Arum and Frank Warren, and all these guys suck so much, and they suck the business dry so much that we don't care if this is the strings attached to a larger picture to whip boxing into shape, to make boxing have to wear the corrective braces on its teeth. And I don't know, I just have to point out, so I probably still look crazy to people, but this is how it all connects in the end. I think this merger for Paramount, which may become long-term the home of boxing, certainly is the home of boxing for Zuffa Boxing, owned 60% by Salah and the Saudi PIF. This is how it's all deeper than boxing.
There's an adage that says boxing is not just a sport, it's a way of life. What you just saw was a man who lives this way of life. While not being a fighter in the ring, he lives in this community, breathes the sport, and feels it to his bones as his universe. And so while some might question the rant and think, well, what does all this have to do with boxing? Well, if boxing is a way of life, well, this all certainly impacts our way of life. And the thing that boxing always has a unique quality for is being a bellwether, being a canary in the mine shaft of what is happening in the world. You can take a look at what's happening in boxing as a microcosm and help you figure out what you're seeing in a broader picture. That is why the passion for people in this sport often runs deep and seems to overflow the edges of what the sport might be. The greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali, talked a lot more about what's happening in the world than what was happening in the ring at times, because he is the greatest, because that's what the greatest in our sport do. They transcend the sport, and we think outside of the box, if you will, considering the ring is a box itself. This is the kind of passion that is inspired when you can live inside a microcosm and see the effects that the big world is having on the small world that we live in, because this boxing community is in fact a small world, but it feels like everything to us who have to exist in it because we have a passion for it. With all that said, the casualty for me in all of this is journalism. It's the voice of the sport. It's the discerning nature of a boxing writer. It's the criticism of a boxing pundit being able to be independent, to not have to concern themselves with whether or not they can pay their bills because they could possibly be shut out and banned from the sport completely based on having a crossword for any type of fighter or promoter where the powers that be don't want a certain narrative to be put forward or even a certain question to be asked. In fact, we're well beyond that. If you're not buddy-buddy with the powers that be, if you're not essentially being dictated to some degree on what you can and can't even discuss, then you are a hair's syllable from being put out at any time. You can't do boxing commentary or coverage, certainly not if you want to do it in person, without every single question in the back of your mind thinking how that might affect your access or who may take offense to it and try to punish you for taking umbrage at something that's happened or questioning something that isn't meant to be discussed. That's the reality of the journalism in the sport at the moment. And it's playing out in front of our very eyes. You now know who's aligned with who. You can expect certain angles to come from those people. And it's not even looked at this stage as unusual. But you got to hearken yourself back to the early days when the boxing writer was king. When the guy with the typewriter and the fedora, sometimes a pipe, sometimes a cigar, sometimes a tumbler of whiskey, and sometimes completely dry, and just a passionate writer with the kind of language that could paint a picture of what boxing was at any given moment, a snapshot that read like a masterpiece. In the newspaper that came out weekly, you were reading, if you go back and read the way boxing was described and the kind of analysis that was given and what pundits were discussing at times and the greatest of our reporters, it is spellbinding. Some of that stuff reads better than some novels that are on the shelf right now as bestsellers. Those days feel like they're behind us. We now, you and I, Sean, are trying to recapture some of that autonomy and may be penalized for it, may be punished for it. You set the tone, you set the stage. You stood up in front of Dana White at that press conference for Canelo Crawford and had the most uncomfortable but confrontational moment that has been had, I would say, in many years before and certainly since. That's the vibe. That's what we're giving. And even you and I think about, for sure, how these things might affect our ability to do this job that we love, or the access to speak to the fighters that we revere, or comment on the state of the business that we're in. But at this stage, without us at least having the cojones, having the big balls to, at the very minimum, and it seems like you have to have big balls now to do the bare minimum. So this, what we're doing, is the bare minimum, my friend. We are absolutely just expressing what we see the way we see it. Not saying that we're absolutely right, not saying that we're absolutely wrong, but you're given a perspective that's honest. And hopefully that sparks a discussion where other people will come in and give their honest opinion and paint the picture the way they see it. And then we can juxtapose positions. We can have open and honest debates. You can rely on certain outlets to report what's actually happening, not what people want to think is happening, want them to say is happening, so that we can just all be small promoters of the big promoter. That ain't the vibe. That ain't it. That's not what we're in it for. So whatever you think of any number of things that Sean said, juxtapose it with your own position. Look someplace else in this profession for somebody who's speaking as frankly, who is speaking as honestly, who is saying things as dangerous as what Sean is saying if they want to continue to work in the sport. If you find people that are doing that, well, then listen to them. But until you do it, unless you can, then you got to at least respect what this man is doing. Respect what it is that he's bringing to the table. And that's all that I believe at this stage we can do. That's what we're doing. That's a discussion that has to be had. We welcome contrary opinions. We welcome the perspective of others. We'd like to hear what you have to say about the condition of the sport or any number of topics that we touched on. But let's, as the journalist class, let's, as the boxing punditry, the writers out there, those who the fans look to for not just honest reporting, but perspective and being a conduit for what the fighters have to say, whether it's comfortable or uncomfortable, and pressing promoters, network execs, and fighters on the decisions they're making. Let's not forget that's the fight we're in, those of us who are outside the ring. Let's remain fighters to that degree. And if we do that, then maybe on our backs, we can resist some of what all of this money, all of this influence, all of this very seductive, laissez-faire nature of having your check paid and not having to actually do the heavy lifting of the job you're meant to be doing can go by the wayside. And as Sean likes to say, you can eat what you kill again. We can rely and respect people in journalism and across the board in this sport to be doing what they're supposed to be doing. That's what I hope this sparks. But the time that we're in right now doesn't suggest that it will. I'm just hoping that it does.
Well, I want to be fair and I want to be fair to our colleagues in that there was a lot of them with much more critical voices over the last decade, maybe plus, about what ultimately brought boxing to its messed up state where it could be overtaken within a matter of a few years by outside money and forces, right? And while they were doing that, and I'll mention a few names, while they were doing that, guys like me into their 20s were running around, in my opinion, doing good interviews when it comes to boxing, when it comes to the sport of boxing, but not with the kind of heavy-handed critiques that deserve to be said that they were saying at times, because we're talking about boxing writers, right? I remember, Michael Montero in the aftermath of the first Canelo, you were there that night too, in the aftermath of the first Canelo-Golovkin fight, a lot of people thought that was a highway robbery draw. The night of, I thought Golovkin clearly won too, and I said that as someone picking Canelo heading in. When I watched it on TV, if you're giving some benefit of the doubt to Canelo, you could have had it a draw, but there was no way you could have had it 118, 110 Canelo like Adelaide Bird, I believe, had it that night, right? And Mike stood up and he went toe-to-toe with Bob Bennett. And I think Mike was working for Ring at the time, which was owned by De La Hoya, who had Canelo as the fighter. So while guys like Mike were going heavy, and I'm going to ruffle a lot of feathers by even mentioning him by people or whatever, they felt he was unfair, him and Steve Kim, right, who I know you used to work with in the Max Boxing days 20 years ago, were being unfair to Al Heyman and the PBC and stuff like that. But they were ultimately saying, whether how much of it said audience member fully agrees with them or not, they were saying fighters aren't fighting active enough, quality of the matchups aren't good enough. They're saying boxing is heading this way, and they're forecasting if it doesn't shape up, look what they couldn't have forecasted that Saudi Arabia would merge with TKO and eventually take over the sport of boxing, but they're saying you better shape up whether you like what I have to say or not. And some of them may or may not have been ousted from some promoters and fights and whatever. Steve, too, was saying all this stuff going on. My point is that there's levels to this, right? It's one thing to have private American promoters not doing what plenty of people feel is not best by the sport. They would have their argument. They place their arguments against their arguments, and these online wars would happen around them with boxing media. And alongside them, a lot of independent channels that do what we do would echo the concerns and the critiques that guys like them would say, right? And I never went against them because, I think plenty of it had merit, and let them have their say in the free market place of ideas. But I would just say there are levels between not putting together the kind of fights, not doing the cross-promotion fights that are best for the sport, like how it took Crawford and Spence way too many years to eventually share the ring as the number 1 and 2 welterweights, and that matchup doesn't exist alone. There's a difference between that and the government that and I think our government. I mean, we're going all the way there. I think our government may have very well have had something to do with 9/11 too, probably. It's one thing to do that and then let a government that is in court right now still for 9/11 to this day, with 15 of the 19 hijackers coming from their country. Discovery through this federal lawsuit in New York finding that their aviation federal system may have known or maybe even helped coordinate what happened in 9/11. There's one thing for that, and then another foreign entity with large donors to Israel trying to control your media, and then using boxing as a chip of this media control to oust promoters from the United Kingdom and the United States, especially if you feel you are someone who is patriotic about the United States. It's one thing to go, I hated what was going on in the sport so much that I'm apathetic to what is coming on now. And people can do and feel what they want. I'm not trying to force anybody towards my perspective. But just to give a full image, I think that's part of what's happening in boxing media too is, hey, we warned you about this. We told the truth when other people, even like you, Sean, weren't telling the truth. You were running around getting your interviews. And now you want to cry foul. Well, for one, it's too late. And for two, I don't give a shit. I'm not moved by what you're saying. I understand that perspective, okay? And I just want to be intellectually honest enough to acknowledge it, Raheem, to understand where those criticisms of me or from us would come from. Now, you are apart from this a little bit. You did go hard at Leonard Ellerbe with the way he would manage a Gervonta Davis. You did go hard at Floyd Mayweather at the peak of his career. So Raheem is actually apart from me. Raheem's been fighting these battles regardless of who was controlling the reins for a long time. I'm addressing more of what's coming my way, but Raheem, you're a little untouchable. You're more untouchable in that respect.
Well, you talk about a time gone by, and I've been banned from everywhere at some point or another.
Right.
And by the grace of the fans, really, whether they be influential celebrity fans who came to my aid, and I'll even go further. At one point, Richard Schaefer came to my aid. There have been a lot of people along the way that once I got banned or once I got my credential pulled and couldn't access fights would work to put me back in the game. Fans would call these promoters out, call these fighters out, get in the comment section, where's Radio Raheem? This isn't, what's up with the ban? Like, blah, 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 blah. And people behind the scenes who weren't with it would go to the people who were keeping the door closed on me and trying to keep me locked out and being like, listen, you can't do that. I know you're upset about this or whatever, but let the kid creep back in, you know what I mean? And I have to work my way back into getting the access, even if they just let me in the fight and then they don't let me see the fighters. And then, I can get a pass, but I can't get any one-on-ones. I can get a one-on-one, but only 2 minutes, 2 questions. All of that shit was all part of it because I was fighting the fight, right? And that time that you're talking about, there was those kind of incremental repercussions for people doing that or lesser than what I was doing. But over time, we started to let that resistance erode. The culture of online kind of trolling and fan apathy and too many people reporting on the sport made it watered down, and there were too many options for promoters and networks to just go to the guy who's going to say the thing that they want to hear. And you can let the other guys in the room, but like myself, but you're just not going to get the access. You're just not going to get the prime amount of time that you need. And you're going to be constantly warned and having to fight battles to get your credential. As many years as I've been in the game, as many interviews as I've done, all this stuff, I'm still fighting with newbies because I'm in the who needs them business if there's a ton of people who are just willing to go along to get along, who are just reporting for access. And as that shift came and the erode happened and the fans became less attached really to good reporting and more to personalities or more to Twitter fingers and who's talking shit about who, and they're way more invested than that than in wanting to know the truth about the sport or wanting you to press their favorite fighter. You can press the other guy, but not my guy. But each guy's got their own set of avid fans and the sycophantic kind of relationship. And so you've got enemies no matter which way you go. And I'll tell you this, it was Steve Kim who said to me, if everybody likes you in boxing, you're probably doing a pretty shitty job as a journalist, right? And this one's one of mine, if the guy you're talking to thinks that you're for the other guy, every time you talk to anybody, you're probably doing your job pretty good. Every fighter should think you're for the other guy because of the way you're pressing him.
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays, they're happy to just not even have to answer those questions and rather go into a scrum with a bunch of people with cell phones up that they know are not going to give them the tough questions. And then the network picks their favorites, has their own outlets now. The networks, the promoters, have their own outlets that masquerade as journalists who clearly have an agenda because they're hired and paid for by the promoter. And then you sit there and absorb and consume that as if it's journalism. And what it really is just a mini promotion. That's just another commercial. And so as this has shifted in the game, fans can't even tell the difference or demand the distinction. So it puts us in real peril if you want to press the issue of being a actual press member and not more of a promoter's entourage with a camera, which is what press and boxing has become. So the guys who nowadays really even say anything that won't be objected to with any consistency are guys who just don't even bother trying to go to the fights. These guys who just sit at home, talk their shit in their house, and observe from the outside. Well, okay, that's cool, but I don't want to be one of those guys. I've never been that guy. Part of the thing that I've earned, part of the thing that you've earned, part of the thing that many people in this business have earned is that access, because we do have those relationships directly with fighters. We do have that relationship with the sport, and that function that the press has in every element of life, in American life certainly, that fifth estate is an important one. Keep honest, keep boxing honest. You're never going to get rid of the small promoter. You're never going to get rid of the guys who take the money or are paid for by the network or the promoters. Those are going to be voices out there. But at the very minimum, you have to give access to and allow for credible journalism to happen, and then let the fan have a little bit of everything. I'm not saying that these people should be shut out. All I'm saying is what is being shut out is a voice of dissent, is a voice of criticism, is a critical thought, is a objective view, and the invitation for debate. That's not the name of the game right now unless you want to get shut out. So it's a dangerous time for the way you talk, Sean. It was a dangerous thing that you did at the Canelo Crawford press conference. And those people in the fan base and in the business who want this business of boxing to be kept at least a little honest, or at least get some kind of objective view about something on a consistent basis, are going to have to fight for that fifth estate. They're going to have to fight for the little guys that are actually doing the job, and us veterans who have been doing the job to continue to have access so the job can get done.
Yeah, I don't know, though. Increasingly, it becomes a choice you have to make. Do you want your credential, or do you want to tell the truth? That's what it starts to become. And from covering politics to covering sports to covering boxing, it's, do you want to make money? And do you want to... And there are people trying to thread the needle. I'm giving it a shot right now. There's others that do what we do that are giving it a shot. But there's a lot of people saying, I can make more money just telling the truth at home instead of running around with a camera at the fights and doing that bit. But what you're saying is there needs to be an environment where you're allowed to do both, where you're allowed to actually be at the fight in person and report honestly on it, and that conflict of interest wrapped around your neck, which, I'll have those battles going forward, and continue to have to try to walk the fine line doing them and plan on doing so. But to take it back to boxing all the way now, it was already a daunting task for anybody trying to go up against this machine that TKO's valued at about $40 billion. Paramount Skydance was at $15 billion. And now that only multiplies with this merger with Warner Brothers Discovery. Can anyone really compete with that over the long term with all the resources at their disposal now? And, I'm not a business expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I hear certain things that they bought this overvalued. There is some debt involved with this merger in the billions of dollars, since Paramount was already paying out exorbitant fees for content, kind of totaling over what their net value was worth before this merger. And I read some articles, Variety and others, saying that's part of why they wanted to make this merger so mad, so their overall capital grew, so they could take on more cost. Again, speaking over my head a little bit there, but sometimes these mergers wind up happening and then the company only devalues over the long term. It's a changing media landscape. I mean, YouTube is where it's at more than anything else. That's cool. You got Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon now. Back in 2002, it'd be like, oh my God, you control the world now. You have MTV, Cartoon, you got HBO, and you got Showtime. I mean, once upon a time, it'd be like, God damn. But now, not as many people watch that shit. And people, with what I'm getting at, are very cognizant and vigilant about following the money. Who owns these companies that I'm consuming this media from? And it makes them hesitate sometimes and worry about whatever agenda is being pushed through. So all that being said, though, do you think once and for all Paramount will be the home? I mean, and Netflix is, even though they lost this merger, they got Mayweather Pacquiao too. They got Tyson Fury next month. But how do you think it will end on that? How do you think this will affect the landscape of broadcasting and boxing?
You're not going to find any safe harbor if you want to criticize those in power, because the nastiness of the relationship will be that those at the top, while you might criticize their competitor at the time, if you get big enough to move the needle, they will see you as a threat to them, regardless to who you've got your jaws locked into at the moment. So they will work together, they will conspire to make sure that your amount of power or influence your audience is limited, so that you can never be big enough to take a shot at whomever you want. They're not silly enough to just be happy that you're taking a shot at their enemy and not realize that you're growing in power and can turn the gun at any time on them. Metaphorically, obviously, I'm speaking metaphorically, not literally. And so what we are embarking upon is a time when you can speak, but only to a degree, and you can be seen, but only as much as the so-called algorithm, or really those who control said algorithm, want you to be seen. Don't be fooled by how many followers you have, because that doesn't dictate how many people see you. The company that holds the platform dictates how many people see you, and the content that you're creating is also owned by them ultimately. No matter what your terms and conditions say, if YouTube were to shut its lights off at this very moment, how much content do you have that you actually even have in your possession, that you have on a hard drive somewhere, even can access? And then if you could access it, where could you show it to a mass number of people? You'd have to be looking for another platform that allows you to do that. So don't be fooled into thinking that your voice is so powerful or so independent, or you have so much a big audience that you can't be stopped, or that you're not currently being controlled. And that is only getting deeper, more obvious. The lines are only getting brighter. And as the power consolidates, it will be less and less necessary for power to even pretend. And that's where we're at. And that's what I see coming. So at the very minimum right now, there are people, I believe, at every level who actually do believe in freedom of speech, who actually do want people held accountable, who actually at the very minimum want open discussion about how people feel and what they're experiencing and what their angle on whatever the news of the day is. Let's at the very minimum, and I mean this is bare minimum, fight for the opportunity to still do that no matter who's in power.
Yeah, and I was just going to intercede in the middle of you cooking that even YouTube has its parameters that have been set. In late 2010s, I think it was 2018, right around the late 2010s, they felt too much conspiracy content right around Pizzagate was happening. All right, and your boy's not on that shirt. Your boy Obama wasn't on that shirt. You know, he had a few visits at Pizzagate along with the Clintons and all that. But anyway, that's
I'm not gonna let you get away with that,
all right.
Sean.
All right,
You're gonna have to substantiate that because that's not true. It's actually not true.
No. Yeah, he had a few rounds of ping pong at Comet Ping Pong. It's all that's not.
What does that even mean? Now, if you can point to the file, if you can point to some evidence, if you can point to some association, you gotta do that. But we gotta keep it honest. And you might think, that's just your guy. But there are differences in guys who are in it and on the shirt, and guys who are not. And we can't just say that everybody's in it because everybody who was in power. So I can't let that one slide.
That's fine. You won't allow a false equivalence. You won't.
That's exactly right.
That's fine. That's fine with me. That's fine with me. I'm just trying to show that there's no angle here for anyone's favorite politician on my side. Nothing like that, you know. But you are right. The false equivalence is a real thing. And playing a couple rounds of ping pong pizza is not the same thing as literally being implicated in the Epstein files. It's not the same thing. But point being, YouTube, along with, I think, Jack Dorsey and Zuckerberg, they got summoned to Capitol Hill in the late 2010s and said, hey, what are we going to do about all this conspiracy content, all this stuff? And people like me would argue, you know, hey, freedom of speech, it protects even if you look at it this way, stupidity, okay? And they would say, yeah, but this level of stupidity is going to grow dangerous. There's a guy who's going to run into Comet Ping Pong with a rifle saying, where's the basement with the kids and all that? And I get that. And then I think, hey, literal libel and defamation is in place to protect certain bounds of speech. That's why Alex Jones had to pay mad money to the Sandy Hook families. It's not like there's already laws in place that don't safeguard from you just not being able to say any stupid shit you want to say. But if you want to think, you know, Freemasons and secret societies and the Vatican and all that are running the world, that's your and sometimes my stupid ass opinion to hold. And but anyways, they got summoned to Capitol Hill, and that's when certain things were put in place to the algorithms of YouTube, and a lot of channels I was watching literally got banned all in one day. Several hundreds, if not thousands, got banned. So just to take us, the point I was making was even YouTube has had some censorship. So even though it's an independent platform, there's even certain shit you cannot say on YouTube anymore, and that's why these other third-party, much smaller platforms have what's considered far left and far right material if you don't stay within the bounds of what YouTube allows. So yeah, just to add that point.
And on top of that, freedom of speech is not freedom of consequence. Yes, certain things you can say that aren't illegal, but will render some repercussions. The truth shouldn't be one of them. Perspective shouldn't be one of them, even as objectionable as it might be to some. If you want to be a purveyor of hate, you want to be a diminisher of people, and you want to put yourself out front as racist or sexist or any number of ists that put a community at odds with you and fight that fight, honestly, you should be able to do that as long as you are not producing actual harm. Can't call fire in a crowded theater kind of
right.
thing. However, also, what is absolutely necessary is for those conversations to be had. Honest debate. You can say something I object to and we honestly debate it. If you don't like something that you heard on this very program, get in the comments and debate it. Make your own video. I wish a lot of us read the way we used to read. I used to be a voracious reader. I barely read. I don't even want to tell you how little I read now because I'm embarrassed. I mean, I still read, but not nearly enough. But shutting down channels, banning influencers is the new burning of books. That's what it is, because we're not reading like we used to. And if you put a bunch of books on a fire heap, very few people these days would miss them. But you shut down these channels, you quiet these voices, you ban these journalists, you limit access to those who need it to do their job. Well, you're the new book burner. You're the new guy that does that. And so as every generation has to fight their fight, this is one of the fights that you have to fight in every generation. Don't lose the battle. Don't lose sight of the importance of just that, because every voice should have an opportunity to be heard, and then deal with the consequences of what's been said. But I would like an open, honest debate to be an option for those who want to speak honestly and in good faith, have a better dialogue with their fellow man, whether it be on agreements or disagreements.